The tablet sat cold and lifeless on her steel table, a slab of gray in a world of gray. It was a cruel joke, a symbol of the outside world they were denied. But for Crystal, it was different. She knew there must have been an explanation. During visitation with her grandma, he would always walk in right after she left. He walked all the way up to the office door, knocked on the window, and asked the lady for a pencil. She looked at him weird, wondering what it was for. Crystal had filled out multiple forms for a court-appointed attorney, hoping to move her case along faster. But they weren't turning them in for her. They just kept giving her more to fill out. He already had one and made her sit down to fill it out. She handed it back to him during his shift, ensuring it got turned in. The voice was a beacon in the storm, a familiar warmth in the cold, unforgiving darkness. It spoke of hope, of a future beyond the bars, a future they dreamed of. It was the voice of her Michael, the man she loved, the man who swore he'd wait. With each message, Sarah clung to his words like a lifeline. They were all that kept her sane. The tablet wasn't like a phone call, with its clear voices and familiar inflections. It was more like a feeling, a whisper in the back of her mind. Except the words were clear, crisp, and the handwriting unmistakable. It was in the way the letters flowed, the unique slant of the words, the pressure on the imaginary pen. It was undoubtedly Michael. Every night, she'd wait. Anticipation would gnaw at her insides, a physical ache. Then, as the clock ticked past midnight, the familiar static would crackle to life. Michael's voice would wash over her, soothing the rawness in her soul. He'd tell her about his day, about the mundane things that filled his life, and she, in turn, would whisper back her fears, her hopes, her dreams. The messages weren't just words. They were a lifeline, a testament to their enduring love. But more than that, they were a puzzle she alone could solve. Because in the curious dance of their telepathic exchanges, Sarah had discovered a secret. It wasn't just the words, but the handwriting that spoke volumes. Each stroke, each curve, was a window into the sender's soul. Michael's handwriting was etched into her memory. Bold, passionate, every loop and swirl a reflection of the man she loved. She could picture him, hunched over his own tablet, brow furrowed in concentration as he poured his heart out into the void, knowing she would hear him. It was their secret language, their lifeline in a world determined to keep them apart. It wasn't just the familiarity of his script. Sarah realized that each message, each thought, carried a unique signature. It was in the pressure of the invisible pen, the spacing of the letters, the way certain words seemed to leap out at her. It was like their minds were intertwined, their thoughts taking shape in the ether between them. And in that ethereal space, Sarah could recognize Michael's touch anywhere. One night, the familiar static morphed into something different. It wasn't the comforting hum she'd come to expect. This felt off. The voice that emerged was wrong, unfamiliar. Panic clawed at Sarah's throat. This wasn't Michael. This was an intruder, a thief in the night, trying to hijack their connection. "Sarah?" the voice whispered, tentative, unsure. It wasn't Michael's deep baritone, filled with longing and love. This was higher-pitched, hesitant, an imposter hiding behind a thin veil of static. Fear, cold and sharp, shot through her. This felt like a violation, a desecration of something sacred. "Who's there?" she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. Her fingers tightened around the tablet, knuckles bone white. This wasn't right. It felt wrong, like sandpaper against her skin. The handwriting was all wrong, too. Instead of Michael's familiar script, the letters were cramped, uncertain, the loops and swirls absent. This wasn't her Michael. This was someone else. The voice continued, oblivious to her fear. It spoke of mundane things, prison gossip, rumors of early releases. But Sarah couldn't focus. All she could hear was the wrongness of it all. The wrong voice, the wrong handwriting. It was like watching a stranger wear Michael's skin. The walls of her cell, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. "Stop it!" she cried out, flinging the tablet across the room. It clattered against the concrete wall, the screen going dark. The intrusive voice cut off, leaving behind a ringing silence. Sarah huddled on her bunk, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drum in the silence. She felt a hand on her shoulder and flinched away, a sob escaping her lips. It was just her cellmate, a weathered woman named Martha, her eyes filled with concern. "Sarah, honey, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice a low murmur, but Sarah couldn't answer. She only shook her head, tears streaming down her face. The words wouldn't come. She couldn't explain the unexplainable. The guards, of course, dismissed it as a psychotic break. Prison was rife with such incidents. They sedated her, their eyes cold and clinical. She was just another number to them, another crazy inmate. No one believed her story about the voices, the handwriting. They thought she was delusional, a danger to herself and others. The days that followed were a blur of medication-induced haze, but even the drugs couldn't completely silence the doubt that gnawed at her. What if she was wrong? What if she'd imagined it all? The thought terrified her. Michael was her lifeline, her only connection to the world beyond these walls. The thought of losing that connection, of him being gone, was unbearable. When they finally allowed her back into the general population, she steered clear of the tablets. The sight of them sent shivers down her spine, but she couldn't escape the whispers, the curious glances from other inmates. They'd heard about her outburst, the crazy woman who thought the tablets were haunted. She became a pariah, an object of fear and ridicule. She remembered the first time she felt something for him. It was in the laundry room, where she worked as a trustee. He had asked her for 2 jumpers of a certain size. As she handed them over, their fingers brushed. The touch sent a shock through her body, a feeling she had never experienced before. Despite being in jail and thinking he was too good for her, she realized that if she ever wanted to be good for someone, it would be someone just like him. Her isolation was complete. The other inmates avoided her, their fear palpable. Even Martha kept her distance, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and apprehension. Sarah was alone, trapped in a prison of her own making. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, judged. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of accusing eyes. The guards, too, treated her differently. Their gazes lingered a little too long, their smiles strained. She was a liability now, a potential problem. They moved her to a different cell, one closer to the guard station, where they could keep a closer eye on her. The weight of their suspicion was suffocating. It followed her everywhere, a constant reminder of her outburst, of her supposed insanity. She knew they thought she was dangerous, a loose cannon. And the worst part was, she was starting to believe it herself. Driven to the brink, Sarah sought out the prison therapist. She had to tell someone, to make them understand. She poured her heart out, describing the voices, the handwriting, the fear that had gripped her. She spoke of Michael, of their love, of their connection through the tablet, but her words fell on deaf ears. The therapist, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, listened patiently. She nodded at all the right times, made sympathetic noises. But Sarah could see the doubt in her eyes, the unspoken judgment. She was just another inmate, spinning fantasies to cope with the harsh realities of prison life. "Sarah," the therapist said gently, "I understand that these voices feel real to you, but you have to understand they're not. It's the stress, the isolation, the medication. It's all playing tricks on your mind." Sarah wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her understand, but she knew it was futile. She was trapped. Her sanity questioned, her story dismissed as the ramblings of a madwoman. Then one day it happened again. The familiar static, the wrong voice. This time, however, it wasn't tentative, it wasn't unsure. It was confident, almost cocky. And the handwriting, it was a mockery of Michael's. The letters overly large, the loops exaggerated. "Hello, Sarah," the voice purred, a cruel smile in its tone. "Miss me?" Rage, cold and fierce, washed over Sarah. She knew that voice. She knew that handwriting. It belonged to Janice, a woman from her block, a woman with a cruel streak and a talent for mimicry. "You!" Sarah hissed, her voice tight with fury. "It was you all along, wasn't it? You were the one sending those messages, pretending to be Michael." A chill went down her spine as she realized the truth. Janice had been toying with her, feeding her lies, exploiting her love for Michael for her own twisted amusement. The dam of her control broke. Years of frustration, fear, and doubt came pouring out in a torrent of rage. She screamed, a primal sound of betrayal and anguish. She flung the tablet against the wall again, this time with enough force to shatter the screen. The guards came running, their faces grim, their hands hovering near their batons. "It was her!" Sarah shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Janice, who watched the scene unfold with a look of malicious glee. "She was pretending to be Michael. She was the one sending me those messages." The other inmates gathered around, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fear. For a moment, the only sound was Sarah's ragged breathing and the distant clanging of cell doors. Then a hush fell over the crowd. Martha stepped forward, her eyes wide with realization. "She's right," Martha said, her voice trembling. "Janice has been bragging about how she could imitate anyone's handwriting, how she was messing with you, Sarah." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The guards, initially skeptical, were forced to take notice. The murmurs from the other inmates, the look of dawning realization on Martha's face, it was all the confirmation they needed. Janice, her face now pale and devoid of its usual smugness, was quickly ushered away by the guards. The aftermath was a blur. Sarah was taken for another evaluation, but this time the therapist listened. She listened with a newfound respect, her eyes no longer filled with doubt, but with a flicker of awe. The other inmates, once afraid, now looked at her with a newfound understanding, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. The truth had come out, ugly and raw. It didn't erase the pain, the betrayal, the fear, but it brought a sense of closure, a vindication of her sanity. The tablet, once a symbol of hope and despair, now lay forgotten. It was nothing but a cold, inanimate object. The true connection, the one with Michael, had never been severed. It lived on, stronger than ever, in the depths of her heart.